Okay, so let's talk about the next step of stuff that we got to do. So we have, let me open it up. We have our mechanics basically set up. We can run our player. They're created as a class. We can move our player. Now we did talk about extracting out stuff for the player so that we had basically like a dynamic class and then a dynamic creature class and then a player. So that's what we're going to kind of do. But as we're doing that, I'm going to help us implement the sprite sheet. So when we're looking here in terms of the sprite sheet, I have a sprite sheet that I've attached for you guys to use, but you guys do need to use your own, and kind of walking through the references of how to do this with P5.js and the play library. Okay, so we want to basically identify each individual frame of that, pass that as an animation for our sprite, and then we can load that animation when we are in that state. So when we are in the walk down state and we're walking, then I can change that state to a walking state. So there are a couple things though that I do want to change. Like here, when we're pressing the key, we are going into the moving state, and then we are selecting our directions. So even if they are just pressing just for a little bit, we can actually select which direction they should be facing. And then we can actually attach move. So we're going to kind of do that with the update or with the display, because these controls are what is basically updating our velocity and what is updating what our state is. So we can kind of change out what our animations are and separate that out from their controls so that our controls are only dealing with movement, and then we can look at specific positions and decide what type of state that we're in. Okay, so we're going to kind of do a little bit of rewrite so that our display right now, instead of just displaying a debug and drawing the body, we can also draw right on top of that sprite that animation, or draw that animation. We can call that animation. So we could use that with our update. So there is going to be some stuff that we want to rewrite in here. Now we talked about it already, but let's go ahead and do it. So we have a player class, and ultimately if we're going to end up doing more than just the player, then I don't need to have my player created where everything is in here, because I'm going to also have enemies that are going to have their own states. They're going to have their own max speed and all of that stuff. So we need to do some rewrites. Okay, so let's go ahead and we're going to create, I'm going to create a new file. We're going to call it dynamic.js, and this is going to this is going to be like my base class. So ultimately everything's going to be inheriting from this one. So I need to think, what is what we're creating? What is the very base of what we're creating? So this dynamic class, that could be multiple things. Like it could be, a teleporter, could be a signpost. Maybe it's something that is map related, not really game related, that I want it to do stuff for me. So this is not NPCs, when I'm thinking in this, but in terms of everything that I could create. An NPC is something that is dynamic. So I would probably inherit from this class and have it have additional features. The same as an enemy. Enemy is almost going to be drawn exactly the same way. I'm going to load the animations almost exactly the same way. So I can actually, the same as the player, a lot of that stuff is going to be code that I actually want to be reusable. So I'm going through and I'm kind of deciding what is things that I think are fundamental for my class. Now I can make some changes to these as we go, but I'm going to basically set up and assign all of this stuff to some variables as I'm passing them in. this dot width is equal to width. This dot height is equal to height. Okay, so all of these are basically stuff that I'm saying I need. All of the things that I'm creating, let's do this dot body, all of them are going to end up having, so I can, keep referencing my player because I'm going to be pulling this stuff. See this create sprite right here? And almost anything that I create in here is going to be, all enemies, all NPCs, all of them are going to have a sprite body. The ones that are moving are probably going to have max speed and friction. Let's see, NPCs, maybe enemies, and the player, they're all going to have some type of health. Okay, color doesn't really matter for everything. If I have like a teleport or a sign, I don't need to have a color. I probably don't need to have states on that. So we're just going to start extracting out some of this stuff. Okay, so this dynamic, let's copy and paste. Let's create sprite, and I am going to pass in the width and the height. Width, height. Okay, that was here. This is going to be used to help build this sprite body. Okay, so all of my dynamic ones are going to have some type of on interact, which I'm going to use to interact with that thing. So, whether we're standing on it, touching it, pushing it. If it's an enemy, that's basically we're attacking them or they're attacking us. NPC, maybe we're, going to buy something from them. So this will ultimately be something that's going to be overridden. Should be overridden by child class. I'm saying child class or parent class or ancestor because whenever we inherit something from something else, we can basically use any methods or functions that we basically created. So we know that we're going to end up having a display. We know that we're going to end up having an update. Okay. And anything as I'm developing, if I feel like I'm using this in like most of the cases on all of them, then I'm going to be putting it in this base class. Okay, so now when I create it, I need to look here and I need to make sure that if I am going to inherit from it, it needs to be created first. So dynamic, okay, now my dynamic class is actually going to be inherited, and I'm going to call this one dynamic creature. Now this one, dynamic creature, we recognize classes because they start with capital, extends, dynamic. Okay, so this is still going to take a constructor. And I still have to pass in what I need. So here I'm going to need to pass in a name, an X, a Y, a width, a height, a sprite sheet. I need to pass in a sprite sheet. I can't think of anything else off the top of my head. So I don't need to keep saying this.name, this.x, that equals X, because I already have that stuff in the dynamic class. That's why I'm inheriting it. So I can just pass those items, those parameters, to the additional pieces in the parent class, and it's going to adopt them. So this is good. And that needs to be the very first thing that I'm doing. But now I can say this dot sprite sheet is the sprite sheet. And I can do this to ultimately hold his animations and all of the pieces of stuff that I would need. So we're going to have a display. let's say we call this method, I don't know, build animations. And in here, we are going to need that sprite sheet. So I want to build the animations here, okay? And then I can call this build animations here. So when I create this dynamic creature, whatever it is, I build this animations. So that's going to be calling all of the stuff that I need to create those animations and add them to my sprite. So that sprite's going to be created, and then I can pass in those animations to hold them. So then what else do we need? So then we can look at our player. There's a couple other things. We got, max speed, max friction, max health. So let's go in there. And for right now, we can just pass that as some default values. So this dot max speed, this dot body dot friction, this dot health. We should probably also put max health so that they can't heal themselves more than what that high value is, unless I change this max health. So let's look back at the player. We do have the states. Okay. So we actually want these states though. Let's look, because I wrote them differently in another place to show you. We can set these states kind of like an array. But this array, so I can have these kind of like key value pairs. Like this is my key and then this is my value. And if I do it like this, I can actually freeze this whole thing so that it can't be changed. I can't add a new state. I can't take away a state from the initial creation. So this would actually be a lot better and actually be much easier to search for our stuff. So let's look at that then. It's almost the same way as what we're doing here. This dot states is, and I'm going to say standing, colon, and I'm just going to put the value 0 for that standing state. So I can check if we're in state 0. State 1, moving, pushing. State 2, attacking. State 3, hit. State 4. Let's see what else we got. Death. State 5, and we got one more that I never did, celebrate. So let's say collected an item. Put that as state 6. Okay. So then when I have those, that's created. I've created these states. I want this to freeze. So object.freeze, and then I can do this.states. This makes it so that I can't add to this later on. I can't build another item in there, which actually will move this. So this is something that I want to go into my dynamic creature. Let's move that. State, current state, current direction. Yeah, those are all things that we could do. Because I'm thinking if I have my enemies, I also want that. So I'm going to do this. And let's go back to our player. Current state, current direction. We want basically that. Now we're not standing. This would be, current state would be, I could say 0. This dot states dot standing. You can say it like that. That's okay too. So let's look back here. We have a display to draw the sprite. We got our control. Now this is technically for the player. So this might be something that I would adopt. So I'll put it right here for now as a control one, but I'm not going to have everything that I can control. The player should be the only thing I control. And then I have this move function. So let's do that. Then we have our display. And our display is overriding what we previously had in the dynamic class. So this is going to go all in there. Okay. So this is basically my dynamic creatures. So when I create a player, I'm actually creating him as a dynamic creature. I'm not creating him just by himself. Or I can actually have a class itself, which now makes sense. If I have a player class, that control may be actually just part of the player, but the display is going to be whatever the previous display is, and I don't have to set that up. This is all set up. I don't need to create anything different for here. That's all previously done. Same as this move. That was in the dynamic creature. So if I minimize that, now if we're looking, my constructor is actually extends dynamic creature. If we look, this just seems like way cleaner. Now I got to pass in all my stuff, name, XY, width, height, sprite, sheet. And then I got to call the super, which would be, in this case, the dynamic creature. Name XY, width, height, and sprite sheet. Okay, so outside of that, all I really have is this control. So let's take that outside of this. I don't want this control right here. This will probably be overridden. Let's cut that out. Console.log will be overridden by behavior functions or the user control function. Okay, so whether it's an enemy, they got some type of behavior function, or we are overriding. Okay, but we're using basically almost all the same code. So then when I'm creating this, is almost the exact same setup that I want, and I don't have to really create a lot of new stuff. I could throw a type in there, and we're probably going to get into that later. So now this player is inheriting from the dynamic creature, which is inheriting from the dynamic class. So let's make sure that we have this. Dynamic needs to be created first, then dynamic creature, then the player. Okay, so now if I come into Sketch, I can say new player, give it a width X and Y, let's say a width and a height, and it needs to have a name, with beard. And this is requiring a sprite sheet, which means I need to load a sprite sheet. So I'm going to load this PNG right here. Okay, so there it is. There's my sprite sheet. So I'm going to make sure I'm typing that name. So link underscore sprite sheet.png, and that needs to be in quotes. This is just like loading something, like loading like another image file. I want to see if there's going to be an error. Build animations is not defined. Dynamic creature, add new player, setup. Okay, now when we are calling a function of that class, we got to actually do this done. Okay, and let's just put a message stub in here, console.log built animations. Okay. Now when we create for that player, who's displaying, see, built animation. So I just need to actually plug in that. And then we create it based on the size. I still have my same movements, everything like what I expected. Okay, so that is us refactoring to use object-oriented programming. Okay, so now let's actually look at using that sprite sheet. So I have in Photopea, I have basically the same thing. I have a whole bunch of grid guides. So in order to do that, if I came to view and I look at add guides, I can add all the horizontal and vertical, and I just match them up. Okay, so I can split out any sprite sheet. Okay, you want to make sure that all of your animations are uniform in size for your stuff, because it's going to make it much easier for you to do the animations. So here I am 16 by 24 for my width. So my width is 16, my height is 24. So I could look here. Now I can have my animations bounce around, and that's where we got to actually kind of come into play and the reference. So if I go to sprite sheet, there's two ways that I can load a sprite sheet. Okay, one is if every single frame that I have, so this works out really well if you are doing a single animation that is not really changing states, you're not really needing to change animations, you're just running through the same thing, or you have all your animations broken up into separate sprite sheets, then this is the way that you'd want to go, because every single cell would have a very consistent row and column. I can pass that as information. Okay, so I could say, and the number of frames to cycle through. So I could say, load the sprite sheet, load this file, and each one is going to be 171 wide, 158 tall, and you're doing a total of 11 frames. Okay, I'm passing it because it's very consistent. However, if we're going to end up bouncing around for different animations, then we're going to be giving an array with the positions and dimensions of each frame. It's flexible because we don't have to have uniform rows. Okay, the key is that we have to actually pass in what all of those values are for the width and height, the individual X and Y width and height of every single frame that we want to use to build our animation. So let's see that in action if we went to the examples for the P5JS play library. So I'm going to go to this one. We have a couple different things going on. We have a very consistent animation that's just starting and stopping. We have this astronaut that's walking around, and we're reversing his animation as we're doing it, which if you plan that out, you can actually save how much work you have to do, because you're just taking whatever is the previous frames and just flipping them. So if they're going left, you could load the left ones and then you flip it horizontally for it doing the right. Now we also have the cells for these blocks. Those are also loaded differently. So let's look. Okay, the first thing that you see is there's normally like JSON files that we can do with this. And since we're actually thinking of like our dynamic creatures, when we're actually loading these animations, we're going to end up having to plan what each animation is and what each JSON file or the frames list is. Right now, I'm going to hack this into the players file to start building some animations for the walk down. I'm going to do something like this, okay, where we can give a name of the actual frame for the animation that we want to do. We're going to name these out. Now, if you're watching, like I can comment out every other one. I could comment out the last 3 or 4. Run this. So we see him kind of putting his arms up and his legs are moving. I could reset this. Now we don't see as much of that animation than what we previously seen. Okay, so we could load these. We would want to preload the PNG into some type of sprite sheet that we're going to pass in. And then we are still in this preload. Once we load that page in, then we can either load the JSON file or we can just call our loading sprite sheet and pass those frames in. So they did it like this using key value pairs. We're going to do it this way for right now. And then we can pass in that sprite sheet. So we loaded the image, we pass in the sprite sheet, and then we add that animation. So look, player sprite sheet, you're adding that sprite sheet, we're loading that animation, we're storing it as a player walk value. Okay, we need to hold it somewhere. And then for the sprite itself, we're going to add that animation. So we can add that walk animation. If we wanted to individually just load, like, say, a stand for which way he's standing, we can store that as a value, can load the image itself. Now, I would say, since we're using this twice, it would make a lot of sense to load this as a file first, load that image, and then load it as a sprite sheet so that you're not loading it twice. Right now it's loading twice. And then we can pass in what that's going to be. I'm giving it the name. I'm passing that animation. Okay, so we're going to use this as our template. So I'm going to come here. I'm going to copy this. And since I'm doing this in my player sheet, I'm building this animation. So I'm going to pass in each one of those frames. That's why I'm doing it right here. I'm going to pass each one of those frames in. And I'm going to use that photo P. I don't need var. I'm going to want to use let. I'm going to use that photo P for all of his stuff. So we want, let's do player walk down. So I'm going to replace this. I'm going to hit Command F or Control F. I want to do walk, and I'm going to replace it with walk down. I'm going to replace each one because that's going to match more what we're doing for the frames. Okay, so now keep in mind every single thing we're doing 70, so that they have a width of 70. All of them are that. We already know what our width is going to be, so I'm going to copy that. I'm going to use that and replace, but I want to replace with width of 16. We already know that. And then I'm doing height instead of height of 94. We know it's height of 24. Okay. All right, so now let's look here. Each one of these, it's 0 to 16, 16 to 16 to 32. So the way that I've placed them, and here's a key that you're going to want to do. You're going to want to select the snap and the snap to, and make sure guides are selected, because then you can actually drag images as you're cutting them up and place them and kind of snap them in this grid. But I am going to want to use these add guides as my help for this, because I need to pick all of my X and Y values. So I know the first one is going to be 0, 0. Okay, the next one is going to be, I'm adding 16 to that, because if I am looking at my x and y, this right here, that's my 16. Let's see, I know that there's a way that we can, okay, see how I have my x and y? Okay, if I'm at here, that's 16. That's where I want my next one to start, okay? 16, and I'm starting at that top part, so 16, 0. And since actually I'm doing all of these as my walk down, those are all going to be y equals 0, okay? So we're going to do that. So here I'm going to replace all of these as 0, 0, 0. Okay, so now here I'm just basically counting up by 16. So 16, 32. If it makes it easier for you to understand it, each time that I put a guide, that is what I need. So 1632, here's my whole thing. I need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. I need 15 of them. So I'm going to put him here just so I can remember. So we are at 16, 32, 48, 64, 80, 96, 112, 128, 144, 160, okay, I think I got more than what I'm supposed to have. Okay, we're counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Need some more, don't I? 12, 13, 14, 15. Okay, so 12, 13, 14, 15. Okay, and we went from 160, 176, 192, 208. 176, 92, 208, 224. 208, 224. The way that I'm doing this, I think, will ultimately make it so much easier because you could pick and choose which type of animations you want to use and the pieces that you want to do. Do I need to, I'm using Link just because I like Link, but do I need to use all 15 of these animations? I actually cut this quite a bit down already. You really only need two frames. You have one where it looks like he's kind of standing and one with their legs kind of separated, and that is actually more than enough. Here, this, I mean, it's just going to look like it's like a smoother move, but do I really need all of those? No. You can still get your game across with just two for an animation. Okay, so I have all of these. I'm identifying all of those. Let's go ahead and save so I don't lose any work. I've identified all of these just for the player now with this JSON, with me naming these are the movements that I'm naming. It's looking for this name. So I can play around with that with the JSON files. So this is what I basically want to do. I built that frame. Now let's go back to the examples. We did this. Okay. So this sprite sheet that I'm passing, when I create, so I'm going to create this animation. That animation that I'm doing is going to be using that. So right now I'm going to do it like this. At the very start of my game, I'm just going to create the players in the preload. I want them created before I do anything else. Okay, but I may end up splitting this up. So this is basically what I want to do. Player sprite sheet. I'm going to load that sprite sheet. And then I am just going to, this animation, right here, where they're doing these load animations, I'm just going to use some of these values right here. Okay, so let's do that player sprite sheet right here. Let's pass that. So I'm going to do this dot player. Let's look at it. It's just a sprite sheet. Okay, so let's rename this a little bit. We already passed in the sprite sheet, which is really going to be the image. And then we'll load that. Yeah, okay. So we do want to load this here. So let's load let player sprite sheet image. Let's be really specific. Function preload. And let's pass that in. So we're going to do player sprite sheet image, so load image, and then I can pass this in. So player link. That needs to be in quotes. If you have this nested in a folder, you're going to want to pay attention to that. Okay, so here is the file. Now, if I create, I actually want to load this here, this player sprite sheet. Now, because I don't have to load it so much. It's already loaded. I'm just assigning it basically to the animations. I might change some of the organization a little bit after this. Okay, so then when I come to this dynamic creature, so yep. So let's call this sprite sheet image. Sprite sheet image is this sprite sheet image. So I'm just holding that image. Now, when I come down here, now I guess let's just this dot sprite sheet is, and then we can load that one. So we're passing in here basically this. That's what's going to become that file. So I guess we'll leave that blank. Well, let's enter it as 0 for now, and then must load. Or build animations. We'll just make the build animations actually pass this back. Okay, so this build animations is going to return. So we're passing in these frames. And then once we have the frames, then we'll do this. Okay, sorry about that. All right, so let's take this. We pass in the frames. We can build that sprite sheet. So I'll just create a temporary variable, player sprite sheet. I don't need to pass in anything because I have it already. So I could just say this image that we're storing as sprite sheet image. Sprite sheet image. And then we're passing in these player frames. We're calling them right here. Okay, now what else do we need to do? All right, so we created this sprite sheet. Now we need to load that sprite sheet. So we're going to do this. And that's my walk down. Okay. So that player walk underscore down. I am not entirely sure, but seeing how this looks almost exactly the same built as this, I'm going to make sure that I'm trying to write that the same way. Let's see what else do we need to plug in. Okay, so we load the animation. Now, if we look down here, we need to add the animation to the sprite body. So player sprite is what they're calling it, but ours is not called that, it's called this.body. So we need to add that. So let's do this. This dot body. Let's look again. This dot body dot add animation. Excuse me. Okay, so there's where I'm adding this walk down. I'm going to call it walk down. I'm adding that animation. Now, how do they call it? So when I'm looking here, these are just randomly doing draw single frames. Here I can change animations and call that animation. Okay, so that's going to be inside of our draw right here. That's how we're kind of displaying. So inside of here, this is, I added the animation. Now I could do that change animation. Let's look at these controls. Okay, so this is where I want, and I'm probably going to change that. I'm going to change all those players. And for a creature class, it's not going to make sense. Actually, let's do that right now. Player, creature. All right, so we want basically our creature to do this. Um, let's redraw. Type error. Cannot read properties of undefined reading index of. Let's play around with actually just default changing the animation. See, because we still, that's called right there. What I think is happening here is that we don't have default values. It may be because we don't load the images correctly. But doing this is how we can better understand. So let's just change our stuff. But it's not. This dot body dot change animation walk. Let's see. Cannot read property of undefined. Okay, so doing it this way, we're trying to keep good class structure. These we may end up wanting passed from a file that we'll also let load. Let's hack this in. We just want to get this to work. So maybe we might load this at the start and then we pass all of this to the player. So this sprite sheet image, we pass it with those creature frames. Okay, let's try this just in the sketch. Okay, so we're still doing the same thing. We're still loading onto that creature sprite sheet. We're taking the creature sprite sheet. We're going to pass it as the walk down animation. This is not going to make sense now because we don't have that animation to add, but that is now an animation, so I can pass this here to the body. We're trying a couple different ways, so this is what we'd be doing in class. Let's pass instead of this, let's pass the actual, let's just do this walk down animation. Creature underscore walk down, and I can't do it like this. Player spreadsheet image, that's what we're loading in here, so I gotta change some stuff. Those are the frames. Player. That name should probably change. We're just trying to hack this in. Creature frames, load spreadsheet. We have that spreadsheet. We're loading the animation, and then we're just, right now, the way that we're doing is we're just passing the animation. So now if I go to the player, I'm passing that animation into this, the super, which is then passing. So I might want to build a player class in here for the animations and make them separate, but we're just trying to get this to work to start off. So dynamic creature. So we pass in the animation. This is that sprite sheet. This animation. And there is that doesn't make sense in this case. Build animations. So we don't really need to call that right now. Okay. This dot body is what? Dot add animation. So that's what we're building. Both of those. Okay. Cannot read properties of undefined reading index of. Let's make sure that we have a image console dot log player sprite sheet image dot width. If it has one, then let's just know that the image was correctly loaded. So we're getting some errors. Did I write my method wrong? Preload. Yeah, okay. Change animation error. I got a 1 for that width. He is there. Okay. I gotta write preload correctly. Okay, so we have all those frames. We put them in correctly. Now, creature walk down. I named that. When I get into dynamic creature, there's not one here. This is this dot animation in this case. And then that's the animation that we did. Let's take off that debug. Okay, so we see I got a little bit of stuff. It looks like there's a couple frames where my count might be a little bit off, or like I got like little extra pieces on there. So I can double check that, but that would be basically my walk down animation. So there's things that we could tweak. Okay, so now let's see if we can develop it like what I was originally doing, because now that we have this, we can make some switches. So let's go back to our sketch. Let's just load the image. So we loaded the image, and then we're going to pass that player sprite sheet to our creature. So we'll go here. Where would be the best place? My frames will probably be different for every single one. Dynamic creature might be, let me comment this out. Dynamic creature might be very specific for this. This is where I would actually want to override. My enemies, my players, their frames will probably be different. So let's put it here. We're gonna override this dynamic creature one that's built to animations. We're gonna create another one. Built animations. Okay. So we create this. And then let's go back to our sketch. And then we're adding all the animation. So we want this. We want this where the player is. Let creature walk down. We're loading that animation, creature sprite sheet. And this is created by this dot, let's just make that super simple, image. We don't need it here anymore. So dynamic creature does not need it. Yeah, okay, so here we're letting the dynamic creature do the drawing, but here we will change the image. So then when we are building the image, we're taking those creature frames, we're using that, we're passing this, putting us a creature sprite sheet, we're loading that animation, we're going to add this animation, adding it to the body, the walk down animation. Now, we need to change the animation. So when he is D, okay, so this would be the update. This is what we want to happen. So update is basically checking if current state, this is where we want to know if we're moving or not. So if current state is equal to this dot states dot moving, so that if that matches, then we're looking in direction. So if this dot current direction is I'm just going to do just the one down. So we're looking at down. That would be 90. If it's 90, if this is true, then I should have it redraw. This dot body dot change animation to walk down. Otherwise, let's do I have other options for change animation? Let's stop. Stops the animation. We only got one animation in here right now. We'll just console log. Different animation. Okay, let's go ahead and run. Throw in an error. Let's see what we're doing. Oops. Not being defined in the current scope, line 18. Oh, because this is player sprite sheet image. Oh, weird. Had caps lock on, I was making things move funny. Okay. My animation state is not changing. But that's because I'm not calling my player update, which makes sense. Player control, p1.update. I'm throwing an error. Current state is not defined. Line 8. This dot current state. You got to do a little bit of work to make sure that we're kind of developing an object-oriented programming to play around. We still want to preload, but we want everything to run inside of its own class, which is where we got to kind of play around with. We'll be putting some other videos kind of going over this, but I think this video is kind of done, like playing around with this. So I'm going to have to run some testing to find out like what is the, because I got to see if this is running. Because if that's not even firing, then we got issues. But you get the idea. We were able to get an animation, but we had it kind of running right in the sketch, which was going to be very messy. This way, we're actually just loading the image, so we can make sure, so console.log, I can load this player sprite sheet image width. If I do this, this will give me, I can start going through. So that's loading one. do dot size. Undefined. Let's just load the whole thing. So this is giving it a width and a height of 1 for the actual image itself, which is weird. And then that is also not firing. So we'd have to play around with this a little bit. But this should give me some hints that I have some issues on sizing, possibly, for this to be loading. Let's see if after it finished before I throw the player in there. There. That's because it created it, but it was still block loading it. So if we've seen that, there is actually a size. So that's telling me, so it is loading. Now we can go through here, player sprite sheet. We know we passed that in there. We go here. We have that image. I'm not storing that image because it's not image equals image. What I built on the constructor. Okay. So this image, when we pass it into here, this dot image, these are also block loading. So that load sprite sheet, that might be something that I'm needing to kind of look at again. You can also actually pull up the file and see what it's looking at. It may be looking like returning something that I can use to check. Load. But this should get you guys enough that you guys could start kind of looking at this. What I do want to see is that you guys are building in terms of something that is organizable. That's a weird word. Organized so that you guys can, make sure that you don't have animations for everything all in your main sketch file. That's going to be really hard to maintain. Ideally, what I would like to see that I want to do is that I want to individually load the images for the sprite sheet. Maybe I have just one image that I'm loading as a sprite sheet. I load it once. I store it in a file. I load individual JSON files either in the classes as I create them or in the preload, and then I can pass those pieces in, like pass in the JSON files into each individual object that's inheriting from the dynamic creature. Okay? All right, so go ahead and play around with this. The goal is that you guys are getting all the different movements on there. We will do this more in class. Okay, good luck. I'm pretty sure I realized just what was going on. The built animations, when I re-changed it, I never called it in this player class. That is probably going to help a lot. Built animations is not defined. It's because it's this that built animations. There we go. Yeah, that was silly on my part. So there's that animation. So it's loaded properly. That happened quick. Okay, so that's not the issue. The image was loaded. I passed the image through, so that image could be reloaded multiple times for all your classes using this built animations, which is what I was kind of planning. So then each individual class, you could have a separate sheets for this to call. The only thing that we need to check, so here, in the update, we're asking if the current state is this dot states dot moving. So that's where we want to look at our dynamic creature. That is the frozen values that we did. This dot states dot moving, that should be changing what my current state is. So when we're in player, this, the current state should be when I'm pressing current state is moving. I'm not changing it correctly here. This is supposed to actually be this dot states dot moving. So now, yep, that's what I thought. Okay, so yeah, just double checking on the code. It's okay. We get errors, we get issues, but yep, that's what we need to do. Double check your stuff. If you are doing rewrites, you got to make sure that you're rewriting everything. So I left this as a string value instead of actually putting it more as the key value pair. So yeah, of course that was not going to match. And then I didn't actually call the method, the function, to build the animations. Using it this way, this built animations, some of these pieces, maybe some of this could get reused, pulled to the actual parent class, but we might want to keep it here because all these player frames, unless we're passing them in via a file and we're manually creating them, then you may want to leave them for the player, and then conversely, we can have it for the enemy and the NPC. All right, good luck, have fun.